All right, so this is gonna be episode 6 of deck profiles for Scarlet and Violet to journey together. It's part of the Exposé series. This episode is gonna be about Koraidon. All right, so this is gonna be the final episode for this series. So hope you enjoyed the series. Hope you learned a lot, and look forward to other Exposé series on different formats. All right, so Koraidon uh, introduced Scarlet Violet base set alongside its counterpart Miraidon. So this card is 230 HP. Uh, Basic fighting Pokemon. Ability Dino Cry. Once your turn, you attach up to 2 basic fight energy cards. Your discard power to your basic fighting Pokemon any way you like. Use this ability, your turn ends. It has the attack Wild Impact for 2 fighting and colors. Does 220 damage. During your next turn, this Pokemon can attack. Psychic weakness, no retreat, no resistance, and 2 retreat costs. Alright, so Koraidon was introduced in Scarlet Violet. That was E block and on. So that was up to Battle Styles or Trillium Raider, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Battle Styles. Yeah. And so, yeah, in that format, you had um, cards like View Me Max, Urshifu V Max, right? Arceus V Star, Palkia V Star, Lugia V Star, Giratina V Star, and then Scarlet Violet came in and introduced uh, your first line of archetypes for the Scarlet Violet era, right? So Koraidon, probably by far, was the best archetype to come out of that format, and so it's gotten a lot of upgrades since then, and so still very holds a very important spot in the format, and not so much in the format it came out, considering it really didn't have much besides Great Tusk in terms of Great Tusk and Halucha, right? In terms of cards to support it, but since then it's gotten a lot of upgrades, and so holds a very important part in the format, right? So I'm just gonna start by flashing the deck because Koraidon has seen a lot of iterations, and so yeah, it might seem a little baffling that Koraidon, despite all the iterations that we've seen of it, might be a very powerful archetype, but it definitely is, and it's just basically because of how the deck is built, right, and the type of uh, roadmap you need to take to win it, right, and so because of that, it may seem like not as powerful as it actually is, but it actually is, right? And so yeah, gonna sort of kind of do my best to really give you an idea of sort of how you should be looking at Koraidon, right? So Koraidon, right? So splash the card again, right? So you can kind of get an idea, right? So Koraidon would fall under the category of a best control deck, right? So I've been going through this series, and I introduced the concept of the types of control decks, right? And so you have control decks, and you have best control decks, and you have anti-control decks. If you want to understand kind of how Pokemon designs their formats, right? So control decks are generally just decks that, uh, if your opponent really didn't have a, if your opponent didn't prepare for it, then you win, right? That's essentially the tagline for control decks, right? So again, Pokemon is trying to go with a very merit based system, and so uh, control decks is essentially how you keep merit in the game, right? So Koraidon will fall under the category of best control, and so best would be, is just a broad term to describe uh, a wide spectrum of decks that generally are really really good at something very specific. All right, so for example, we've covered three best control decks in this series. We covered Charizard, we covered Terapagos, and we covered, finally we're covering Koraidon. Right. So in Charizard's case, Charizard uh is very good at, scaling, right? So scaling, how we describe it in Western game design, is basically just, you know, getting stronger as the game progresses, right? Terapagos, right, would be very good at uh attacking, right? Would be generally the best way to be looking at it, without getting in too deep, is that Terapagos would just be really good at attacking, right? Then something like Koraidon would be a deck that's very, very good at disrupting, right? So I'm gonna try to explain that a little bit deeper, but that's just what you should keep in mind when you're thinking about the concept of best control, right? And then understanding kind of what makes Koraidon so powerful, right? So let's just get into the counts. So this list playing two Koraidon EXs, right? So you're only gonna really need the, you can only, again, you can only use the ability once, right? So as long as you hit it, you're good to go, right? So you just play two, right? And so that's like your, that's like the best opener, right? You're gonna have for the deck, right? Is Koraidon, right? And like obviously, right? If you just put four Koraidon on your deck, right? The decks, you're gonna hit the Koraidons very early a lot, right? But you're taking a lot of power out of your deck just so you can hit Koraidon early, right? So you don't want to play too many, right? But you want to play enough so that, you know uh it's always in your deck, right? So two copies is good, right? So card that you're gonna play four copies of in this deck is Palucha, right? So this is also an opener in the deck, right? So Palucha, pull it up here. Has the ability flying entry, right? So reads, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may choose two of your opponent's bench Pokemon and put one damage counter on each of them, right? Then it has the attack, wing attack for fighting in two colors, does 70 damage, right? Psychic weakness, 70 HP basic Pokemon, right? No resistance, one retreat cost, right? So this card has a very good ability, right? And naturally, you're going to want to use the ability as many times as you can in the game, right? And so play four copies basically, right? So yeah, so as a Pokemon opener that you play this deck is Tinglu EX, right? This card was printed in Paldea Evolved, right? So has the ability Curse Land, 240 HP, basic fighting Pokemon. Curse Land, as long as this Pokemon, as long as this Pokemon is an active spot, your opponent's Pokemon in play that have damage counters on them have no abilities except for Pokemon EX. Right? Then has the attack Land Scoop, 3 fight energies, does 150 damage, 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Right? Grass weakness, 4 retreat cost, no resistance. Right? So again, this is another card where it's very powerful, right? But and you want to open it, right? But again, put in many copies of this card in your deck will increase your chances of opening it, but also lower the power level of your deck, right? And so you want to play just enough so that you can hit them, right? But not too many, that you have too many, right? You play 2 copies, right? And probably the most powerful opener in the deck is Great Tusk EX, right? So card is printed in Scarlet Violet base set. It's 250 HP, fighting basic Pokemon, and it has the attack. First attack, Bedrock Buster, 40 damage for fighting energy, discard Stadium in play. Then second attack, Giant Fangs, 3 fighting energy, 250 damage. Pokemon does 50 damage to itself, right? And Psychic Weakness, no resistance, 4 retreat cost. Right, so probably best opener in the deck, right? Uh, so this card has a very good attack, right? That is basically like, again, it's an attack sort of like Burning Darkness, right? Where if your opponent didn't prepare for it, you just win, right? And so this is a card that you're gonna want to get into, right? It's basically your escape plan, right? If your opponent's getting too out of hand, right? And you're just trying to basically check them to see if they can out it, and if not, you win, right? So yeah. Again, right? This card is very powerful in the deck, right? But it has no abilities, right? It has a very high retreat cost, right? And its attack, although it's very powerful, right? It does damage to itself, and it's very hard to charge up, right? So you're not gonna want to have too many copies in this deck with this card in your deck, and also this deck's power isn't necessarily in the deck's attacks, right? Which we'll get into. And so, although this is probably your best attacker in the deck, right? It's something that if you open, great, but generally you're gonna have to just look for it and then charge it up, right? So just play 1 copy so that again, right, you can put your power into other parts of your deck, right? And you have 2 copies of Luna Ursaluna, right? Cards printed in Shrouded Fable. So it has the ability Battle Harden. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may attach up to 2 basic fighting energies cards from your hand to this Pokemon. Right? And then has the ability attack and Mad Bite for 2 fighting and a colorless. Does 100 damage plus. Attack does 30 more damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. Has Grass Weakness, 4 retreat cost. 150 HP, basic fighting Pokemon. Right? So this card was printed Shroud of Fable, and it's a very good upgrade to Koraidon archetype, right? Is in that you can use it to charge up a fighting Pokemon attack, without having to use the ability of Koraidons. So this gives you a better way to control the outcome of the game, right? Pairs very well also with Halucha too. If you're using a lot of Halucha abilities, right? Getting those Pokemon to get promoted, right? They'll have damage on them, and then Mad Bites can dispatch them very easily. Last basic Pokemon in the openers is Latias EX, right? So last EX is printed in Surge Sparks. So a basic 210 HP psychic Pokemon has the ability Skyliner. Your base Pokemon in play have no retreat costs. Then it has the ability attack Eon Blade. There's 2 psychics and a colorless, 200 damage. During your next turn, this Pokemon cannot attack. Dark weakness, fighter resistance, 2 retreat costs. Right, so I think this is actually the first card I've covered in this deck profile series that is in the deck, but you can't actually use this attack, right? And this is actually something that I was uh, actually I wasn't even gonna put it in this deck profile just because I didn't want to mess with the continuity of this series, but um, actually just something that I can sort of explain in Pokemon's game design that I can use this card to highlight. All right, so card like Latias seems very odd, right, for people to really understand, right? And has a very powerful ability, right? Has a lot of HP, but in most of the decks that you're gonna play it in, it's not gonna be able to attack. All right, and so it seems like it's just a very confusing card, right, for people who are just playing, starting the game, right, and don't really have a lot of background, right, to really understand game design, right, and so I'll kind of explain kind of what this card is in the archive of uh, cards, right, in the card archive of Pokemon in particular. All right, so cards like Latias EX, right, would fall under the category of optional cards, right? Again, I wish I had like a graphic to really illustrate this a little better, but just take this explanation as you will, right, and then reference it if you're trying to, understand this concept a little more. But these are optional cards, right? So these are not cards that make up an archetype in and of themselves, and they're not upgrades to any archetypes. They're just cards that are like options, right? Hence the term optional in the archive of a format. And again, right, they can, they usually generally have very powerful effects if you can use them. And outside of that, they don't really fit anywhere else, right? And so that's essentially what Latias is, right? Another Pokemon that would be a good example of an optional card um, would be something like Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, right? That would be another example of like an optional card, right? It's not a card that necessarily would fit into an archetype in and of itself. It's just a card that's in the archive of the format to be used, but it doesn't necessarily fit anywhere specific, right? And that's exactly what Blood Moon Ursaluna is, right? Blood Moon Ursaluna Latias EX, right? So not to get too deep into that, so it doesn't get too confusing, but that's what Latias EX is, right? All right, so those are your Pokemon openers for this deck, right? And so to get into them, you have um play 4 copies of Ultra Ball, right? So Ultra Ball is a very powerful opener in this deck, right? In that you're gonna want to get fighting energy into your discard pile, and so Ultra Ball is probably the best opener to do that, right? And so yeah, you can Ultra Ball for like you can Ultra Ball 2 fight-ins for Koraidon. Then you can just use uh what's his ability called again? Dino Cry, right? So 4 copies Ultra Ball, your main opener, and you're gonna play 2 copies of Larry, right? So Larry, printed in Paradox Rift. Up here, so reads uh flip a coin. If heads, search your deck for up to 2 Pokemon. reveal them and put into your hand. If tail, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. Alright, so uh yeah, so this card, very good opener in this deck, right? Um and so either way, flip heads or tails, right, you're gonna get value from this card, right? It's just basically how much value you're getting from this card, right? And again, right, this deck is a deck that doesn't really necessarily need to play like a very hot style, if you want to call it that, right? So um yeah, it's you don't necessarily need something like something especially like Brock's Groudon, right, which came out in Journey Together, would not be a better alternative to this card, right? In that actually Brock's Groudon would probably be a better alternative to this card, right? Especially considering you're not playing any evolutions cards. So you could actually probably just play Brock's instead of Larry. But when I built this deck originally, I was playing it with Larry. Um, so yeah, I didn't take them out. But yeah, Brock Scouter would probably be better than Larry because consider they're basically doing the exact same thing because you're only searching for basic Pokemon anyways. So yeah, these could be Larry's, but they could also be Brock Scouter. But it's also just to illustrate, the fact that something like Larry could search any Pokemon, right? So if you wanted to play like a stage one, for example, you can easily play um, something like Lamora EX, right? In this deck, right? And something like Larry would be very relevant in this deck. Right? So Larry is just a good sample card to have in the deck, but based on this list, you probably just want to play Brock Scouter, right? So Brock Scouter or Larry, it's kind of arbitrary, but yeah, right. So two Larrys, right? Then trying to hit the Larrys with 4 copies of Pokegear EX, right? I mean Pokegear 3.0. So Gear 3.0, look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You may reveal a support card you find there and put it into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck, right? So again, right, play 4 copies so you can open them, and yeah, generally probably trying to hit Larry's, and then your other opener trainer card is Bonus Tenacity, 3 copies. Search your deck for Stadium and Stadium card and Energy card. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Right. So yeah. So this card is generally going to be searching, a fight energy. Then you're going to be getting your supporter for the turn for the game, right? Which I mean your trainer. Just mumble my words. You're going to get your stadium card, which we haven't covered yet, but yeah, this card is just very good with this deck, right? Because you can search out an energy, then you can get a stadium, right? So you can actually search out up to like 3 cards basically, right? With this card and the Cycling Road, right? Cycling Road reads once your player's turn, that player may discard a basic energy card from your hand in order to draw 1 card, right? So if you use Course Tenacity, right, you can get the Cycling Road, you can get a Fighting Energy, and then you can draw 1 card, right? So pretty strong card, right? You search 2, draw 1, essentially in this deck. So that's really strong, right? And the last openers for this deck are Energy Search, play 3 copies, and Energy Search reads, search your deck for a basic energy card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. Right? So Energy Search, uh pretty it's pretty staple card. It's been in in standard. I think it's been standard since I think the only format that wasn't a standard was like a really late X and Y format, I think. X and Y to Sun and Moon format, but since then pretty much been in standard. I think it got reprinted again as Sword and Shield, but yeah, this card is generally gonna be your like go to energy search, right, for any formats, any standard formats, right, and so pretty reliable card. Doesn't have any conditions. You can just play it from your hand. So very powerful card, especially in a deck like this, right, where you have a lot of cards in your hand that you want to keep to combo with energies, right, such as Blood Moon Ursaluna and Cycling Road. And so, yeah, very strong to play this card, right? So those are openers for this deck. Let's get into extenders. So again, right, already mentioned, play 3 Cycling Roads in this deck. So Cycling Road, again, we already read it. So this is Stadium for the deck. So this Stadium is very good in this deck because it lets you discard an energy from your hand, right, and lets you draw a card, right. And this deck doesn't have a lot of draw power, right, and we'll get into why. Uh, but yeah, this card is just very powerful in this deck. Combos well with like everything in this deck. So again, right, don't want them to clog up your hand because generally, once you've gotten at least 2 energies in your discard pile, the card's kind of just basically just a stadium bump, right? So yeah, don't want to play too many. So and plus you have close tenacity to search it, so you don't need too many to hit them, right? And other main extender is gonna be Iona. Play 3 copies. I kind of gave like a word salad about Iona in the Age Slash video. So pretty familiar with Iona if you watched that video. So again, right, this deck doesn't really want to have too much draw power in it. So 3 copies is fine so that you can just get them, but they're not, you're not drawn into it too much, right? And of course, play Super Rod Power Pad, 1 copy of each. Don't know how this card got in here. I don't even know if it's in here. It is actually. Sorry. So yeah. The other stadium playing this deck is Mesagoza. Play 1 copy of it. Right. So yeah, I've been testing with a lot of decks recently, so I've had a lot of time to go over this deck before this video. So forgive me, I'm a little all over the place, but yeah. Also forgive me if I'm not too familiar with this deck list, right? But this is definitely a very avant-garde deck compared to a lot of the decks that are in the format. So it's also a very hard deck to sort of get familiar with, right? You definitely have to play with it a lot. So forgive me. So Mesagoza, right? So it's a stadium card. Reads once during each player's turn, that player may flip a coin. If heads, that player searches their deck for a Pokemon, reveals it, and puts it into their hand. Then that player shuffles their deck. Right? So this deck, uh, only reliable search for Pokemon is Ultra Ball, and so um, yeah, you're generally gonna probably play probably one Ultra Ball, right, throughout like the early game, and so you're gonna need other ways to get into your Pokemon, and uh, since a lot of the deck doesn't really revolve around searching Pokemon, it's pretty hard to get them. So 1 copy of Mesagosa is really good, right? In that it'll buy you a lot of turns, right? Where you'll be otherwise searching for Pokemon, you just get it with Mesagosa, right? That's generally what this card is trying to accomplish, right? And it's also just the 4th stadium in place of, you know, Cycling Road, right? So again, right? Also, if your opponent, is using your Cycling Road to their advantage, too, you can play another stadium, and in this case, it's Mesagoza, so you can just get rid of Cycling Road, so they can't use it, right? Because generally, again, right, once you're done using about 2 cycling roads, you're not going to need any more. So it's better to just get rid of it, right? Then we're getting the last 2 trainers. Get into this card. To play 1 copy of Squavit. Squavit was printed in Scarlet Violet base set. And so this card has the ability Nest Stash. Right. Once during your turn, you may shuffle your hand and put it into the bottom of your deck. Put any cards in the bottom of your deck. This way, draw a card. Right. So this is another card that would also fall under the category of optional cards. Has a evolution. That got printed in Scarlet Violet base set as well. Read the EX. Has the first attack, never ever enough. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may put those cards into your hand. You don't discard those cards and draw 3 cards. In the second attack, slip and roll. During your next turn, this Pokemon cannot use slip and roll. Right, fighting. Weakness to a tree cost, 260 HP, stage 1. Right, so this is another card again that's was printed in Scarlet Violet, and it would fall under the category of optional cards. Right, cards that are not necessarily making up an archetype in and of themselves, but would be part of the archive of the game, right? So that you can have that option of using them, right? Hence optional cards, right? So generally, uh, putting an EX into play that's not necessarily uh fulfilling anything, fulfilling anything meaningful. It's pretty risky. So Squavit is just fine to play by itself, right? So yeah, we play the one Squavit, but we don't play the Greedit, and so the ability is generally what you're gonna want, anyways, right? So it has the attack, bite, 2 colorless, does 20 damage, right? Fighting weakness, no resistance, 1 retreat cost. Right, so I haven't gotten into the win conditions yet, but this card is very important in this deck. And so I think I'll try to cover it again when I'm going over win conditions. Actually, I'll cover it in the last section, opening hand and I'll deal hand. So yeah. So last 2 extenders to play are a copy of Penny. Right, so Penny, put one of your basic Pokemon all attached cards into your hand. Right, so this deck has a lot of abilities that require the Pokemon to be played from your hand. Right, and so playing Penny is very good to reset those abilities. Right, and so that's generally what this card is going to be used for. Right, and the last sender is a copy of Lana's Aid. Card is printed in Twilight Masquerade, and its effect is put up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon that don't have a Roblox and basic energy cards from your discard pile to your hand. Pokemon EX, Pokemon V, EX, etc. have Robloxes, right? So essentially, what this card reads is you can target up to 3 of any combination of basic energies or Pokemon that don't have a Roblox, right? So, for example, I have 3 fighting energies in my discard pile. I can take 3 fighting energies, right? If I have 3 fighting energies in my discard, I can take 2 fighting energies, right? And so on, right? If I have, 3 Haluchas in my discard pile, I can take out 3 Haluchas, and so on, right? So that's basically, or if I have like a Halucha and 2 fighting energies, I can take a Halucha and 2 fighting energies, right? So that's essentially what that card's errata means, right? So yeah, this card's very powerful in this deck, right? A lot of Pokemon have abilities that let you play them from your hand, right? And so, and also Blood River Saluna, right? Which needs energies in your hand, right, to attach to it when you use ability. Those cards very good with cards like Kalucha and Blood Moon or Selena. So win conditions for this deck. So of course play boss orders, right? One copy, right? That's not really a really. This is kind of just win condition that you want to play. So just play one copy. But generally, what you're going to be playing throughout the game are these cards, right? So play one copy boss orders, and you also play 3 copies of Pokemon Catcher, right? So Pokemon Catcher reads it's an item card. Reads flip a coin. If heads, switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. Right. So yeah, this is a very good card that is in this deck, and once you understand the other win conditions, you'll see why. Right. So play one copy of Eerie. Right. So Eerie supporter card reads your opponent reveals their hand and you discard up to 2 item cards you find there. Right. So you have that, and you also have one copy of 06 Machinations. Right. So 06 Machinations. Their opponent discards cards from their hand until they have 3 cards in their hand. Right. So these are like your main win conditions for the deck. Right. These are cards you're trying to get into as quickly as possible, and you're trying to loop them. These cards like Palpad, and so since these are cards that you're trying to hit, right? You're not necessarily trying to take your opponent's card apart. You're trying to basically limit your opponent's resources so that your cards can basically just do what they need to do, right? So playing a card like this, right, like 06 Machinations or Eerie on your turn, uh, again, right, these cards, reward grades, if you want to call it that, right, are very, very various, right? They fluctuate a lot, and so you might not necessarily just want to close a turn just by using one of these cards. So you play cards like Pokemon Catcher so that, if you don't get as much value as you think from the card, then you can use a card like Pokemon Catcher, to swing the board uh, in a more favorable way, right? So that's essentially kind of the main way you're gonna be uh, disrupting your opponent's board, right? Then the other one condition you play is Hand Trimmer, right? So play 2 copies. Hand Trimmer was printed in Temporal Forces, and it reads each player discards cards from their hand, so they have 5 cards in their hand. The opponent discards first, right? The player has 5 or fewer cards in their hand, they do not discard, right? So again, another card that's going to be disrupting their opponent. Play 2 copies because this card is very powerful, right? But again, just like 06 Machinations and Eerie, the reward grade is fluctuates a lot. And so yeah, just you're not gonna get as much you're not gonna get consistent value just playing one. So yeah, you play 2 copies. Generally 2 is gonna be able to do the trick. Right. So that's your win conditions. Then resources you play 11 basic fighting energy. Right? Right. So that's the count for the deck. So let's get into last section, which is opening hand and ideal hand. All right. So I'm just gonna shuffle this deck up, right, and going to take a look at the hand and sort of give you an idea of how you would play out the open hand that I get. Right. And I'm just gonna cut it. And take top 7. Take a look. Right. Alright, so top 7 we got Halucha, we got a Course Tenacity, we got a Mesagoza, Halucha, Iono, Pokegear, Master Ball, and Boss's Orders. Right. So generally when you're starting a Pokemon game, you usually flip a coin before you see your hand. But let's just say I didn't see my hand first. And I want to go second, so I'm gonna just call Tails. Right, I got Tails. So I'm gonna go second. And the only basic Pokemon I have in my hand is Halucha. So I'm just gonna open Halucha. Right? Take my prizes. Right? And just gonna look at my hand, right? So this hand we have, right, Quarter Tenacities, Mesagoza, Iono, Pokegear, Master Ball, and Boss's Orders. Right? So again, right? So for this deck is a deck that has a very interesting map to win in, right? As opposed to a lot of decks that are really just trying to set up main attacker and then sequence into other attackers through the deck, right? This deck is trying to basically limit your opponent so that you can gain an edge, right? So as opposed to doing something where you're just trying to basically just attack more than your opponent. In this case, you're doing a lot of calculated moves, right? So that you can gain an edge, right? So this deck is very much different from something like Terapagos or something like Charizard, which are also best control decks. In that you're not just trying to get an attacker up like Terapagos, or in Charizard's case, all the attackers that you can put in Charizard and Charizard as well. In this case, you have a lot of Pokemon that do a lot of different things, and you're trying to, use them all situationally, right? Based on the situation, right? It also leans a lot more into the fighting, style of Pokemon, right? In the core games, fighting Pokemon are generally Pokemon, again, that are also, like, they have a really interesting maps to win in, right? So that's definitely kind of where they're drawing this from, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of why uh, a deck like this kind of functions like this, right? That's kind of just how Pokemon does their game design, right? So with a hand like this, right? So just without looking at the top deck, immediately what I see is that I want to. Uh, well, the first thing is that I don't have any energies, right? And so my guaranteed out to energy is Chorus Tenacity. And so probably without even seeing my top deck, probably just thinking of playing the Chorus Tenacities first, right? So let's just see the top deck. It's Great Tusk EX, right? So this is very interesting because I have an attacker now, right? I can turn online, right? So just gonna bench it, and then I'm gonna use Mesagoza first, right? Because I'm already like without opening energies, I'm already at a pretty big disadvantage. So I'm gonna want to use Mesagoza to sort of give myself more agency with my hand, right? So just flip for Mesagoza, caught in the thing, but let's just say it's a heads. Right, so I got a heads. I'm gonna search my deck. Right, so I'm just gonna do a deck search, and I'm looking for Latias EX here, right? Because I want to get Great Tusk up. So I'm just gonna put down Latias EX Mesagoza, right? Deck search is alright. Like, there's not anything. Only one of that you're really gonna look for is Squavit, and Squavit's in the deck, so that's fine, right? So don't want to waste too much time on the deck search. So I got Latias. Now, and I actually didn't even cover the Master Ball in the profile video of the deck. But yeah, the ace spec for this deck is Master Ball. and it should be pretty apparent why. Right, this deck has a lot of cards that you need to play from your hand, and so something like Master Ball is really good. You can also just play Scoop Up Cyclone, but this deck, again, right, doesn't have a lot of draw power, so you're gonna get more value from Master Ball generally in games compared to something like Scoop Up Cyclone. So I feel like Master Ball is probably just stronger, right? So it's pretty funny that we opened it, but yeah. So yeah. So now the Master Ball can be used to get something like a can get used to be get something um like a Koraidon or another Halusha, right? You're going second, so your opponent has had a chance to set up, and so Halucha is probably another good Pokemon you can get here, right? So I'm gonna play Master Ball, right? Then you're gonna grab second Halucha, and yeah, you're gonna bench it and use its ability, right? Right. So use Halucha's ability, right? And so this hand, honestly, the Koros is nice, but uh, you don't have any energies after that, right? So whether you get an energy on this turn or not is actually kind of irrelevant because you're gonna need to use Iono next turn anyways to get your next energy, right? Not counting your top deck. And so instead of playing Kodos Tenacity and getting the guaranteed energy, just play Iono, right? And basically now you're just rolling basically to see if you get the energies, right? You just shuffle the deck. Right. And also, you've already played your stadium too, so Chorus is you're not even going to be able to use the stadium anyways. So you're really just searching for the energy. So you might as well just roll to try to get the energy. So yeah, all right. Open the deck, play Iono. These guys get shuffled. Then they go to the bottom, draw six. Right, right. So you hit the energy and you hit energy search. So that's huge. Right. So just gonna attach the energy, return onto your Great Tusk. Then you're gonna use Skyliner to retreat and promote Great Tusk EX. And alternatively, another thing you can also do is you can use Hand Trimmer too before you attach. Right, since you have six energy cards, six energy in hand, six cards in hand. Right, if you play Hand Trimmer, you don't have to discard. So that's also something you could do as well. Kind of psychs your opponent out because they're going to count your hand and they're going to see you have six five cards, right? So it's a pretty cool line. But with six cards, your opponent's just going to discard one, and that's kind of all right for a hand trimmer. You generally want to probably target two cards with hand trimmer, right? So if your opponent has seven cards, that's pretty good for hand trimmer, but six is kind of whatever, especially in the early game, right? So yeah, so we're just gonna attach, and then you're just gonna use Bedrock Buster, 40 damage. Plus you got the damage from Flight Entry. This goes into the discard pile, and that's a good opening, right? So that's open in hand. Prizes we kind of find anyways. You press penny and you prize both thing lose. So that's kind of unfortunate, but it's all right. So yeah, so that's a pretty good opening hand, right? Let's look at a more ideal hand, right? So ideal hand for this deck, you're probably going to want to open Koraidon, two find energies, or an out to at least an energy. So let's say it's energy and an energy search. Then get like Ultra Ball, right? Then probably want something like a Poke Gear. Then Squavit and like a cycling road, right? 7. Yep. So that's generally like your ideal open, right? So this hand open 7, right? So you're gonna open with the Koraidon, and basically, so it doesn't really matter what your prices are, but essentially what this hand does is it gives you your main optional card, right, that you're gonna be using, and also just gives you the Koraidon ability immediately, right? So for a hand like this, you're gonna want to play the energy search, right? You're gonna get the energy, right? Then you're gonna play Ultra Ball. You're gonna search out the card that you're going to be using, right? Depending on what you're up against, right? Again, this is a deck that doesn't really have a uh, one size fits all strategy. You're gonna need to adapt based on what you're facing, right? And so if you're playing something right that has a lot of abilities, then you can use the Ultra Ball to grab something like a Tinglu, right? Bench it, and then you're gonna put the Cycling Road into play. You're gonna look at your Poke Gear, right? If you're going second, probably want something like a Larry or something like that, or Brock Scouting, right? Then you're gonna use it, and you're gonna get like a Latias. You're gonna get a Halucha, right? And then you're gonna use Halucha. You're gonna target Pokemon that have abilities, right? And then you're gonna, well, that was your last card in your hand, pretty sure. But either way, what you can do now, you can now just promote this. Then you can use Dino Cry, and now your opponent's Pokemon don't have abilities, right? That have damage on them, and you targeted 2 Pokemon, right? And you just go from there, right? So this would be like your ideal start, right? And so you have no cards in your hand, right? Which just seems like kind of the opposite of ideal, right? But again, this deck's power is not in your head. This deck's power is on your board, right? So with a board like this, you have free retreat, right? You can draw an extra card per turn. If any of your Pokemon get knocked out, you can get the energy back, right? And then you have a single prize attacker, right? That has a pretty decent attack, all right? So that's essentially, and then you have Cycling Road, right? So if you draw an energy, you can just draw, right? And so, yeah, right? So you don't have a hand, but your board is very strong. That's basically where this deck's power lies, right? And so, again, this is not a deck like Terapagos where it's very beginner friendly. This is definitely a deck that you play that where you feel very confident in your ability to disrupt your opponent, and that's like what you're leaning into, right? So again, right, this is not a deck that you just pick up and then you just do 5 million damage over and over, right? This is not that type of deck. This is a deck that is a very skill intensive deck. So yeah, don't just take this deck and just start playing it, especially if you're a newer player. This is definitely a deck that you would play if you're a more experienced or more confident player, and so that you would think, right? And then basically what you do, just look at your top deck, right? Whatever it is, if you can't play it, you use Nest Stash, and you draw another card, right? Then, in this case, you get Larry. Larry doesn't really get you anything here, so you're just going to hold it. Then you're going to draw. You get an energy, so now you can attack. And you have a card in your hand. You can put it to your band, bottom of your deck, draw 1 card, right? This deck, the cards in this deck, they're not very powerful, right? I mean, the cards in this deck are very powerful. So, like, 1 card can really swing the game, right? Like, let me just go through the deck, right? If I get like a 0-6, right? Like, let's say I had a Larry in my hand, right? And 0-6 is on the top of my deck, right? If I use Nest Dash and then I draw into a 0-6, right? I just limit my opponent's hand to 3 cards, right? And they can't use abilities, right? And if they knock out my Pokemon, then I can just use Dino Cry, right? So this deck, although it's very difficult, one thing that I can teach you is basically just like limiting your limiting your own options so that you can make more decisive moves, right? So basically, just it's like a limit testing deck, right? That's the best way of describing kind of what this deck would be best used for. All right, so yeah, this would be like your limit testing deck for the format. All right, so that's the end of the video. So thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in the next video.